A billionaire CEO
can't be
denied
real.
the child was his and walked away. Years later, he saw twins
wrong?
with his face, and the truth shattered his world. 10 years ago, Julian Hayes stood in his penthouse as rain lashed against the windows. "It's not mine," he said coldly, not even looking at Isabelle's tear-streaked face. "And even if it were, I'm not interested in being manipulated." With those words, he walked away from a woman carrying his child, choosing his empire over responsibility. Fast forward to present day. Julian sits in an upscale restaurant, celebrating another corporate victory, when laughter catches his attention. Across the room stands Isabelle, older but unmistakable. Beside her, two 9-year-old twins with his eyes, his jawline, his gestures. As their gazes lock across the crowded room, Julian's carefully constructed world crumbles beneath the weight of undeniable truth. Have you ever wondered if a lie buried in paperwork and power can truly stay hidden forever? Or does the universe have a way of bringing truth to light when we least expect it? Before we expose this lie, a quick favor, a coworker said storytelling channels like ours are fading out. I want to show them we are just getting started. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button now. It is completely free and fuels the channel. Tell me where in the world you're watching from down below. Now, sit back and enjoy this story of a man who discovered that some debts can't be paid with money. In today's story, we explore what happens when a man's past catches up to him in the most undeniable way possible. Rain tapped against the windows of Westbrook Tower as Julian Hayes reviewed acquisition reports in his corner office. 40 floors above the city, he commanded an empire built on calculated risks and unwavering focus. At 38, he'd transformed Hayes Industries from a regional player into a global powerhouse, his name synonymous with precision and uncompromising standards. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, your 7 o'clock dinner reservation has been confirmed." "Thank you, Diane." His voice carried the quiet authority that defined him, measured, controlled, brooking no argument. Julian closed the folder and moved to the window. The city sprawled below, its lights blurring in the rain like watercolors. Success had given him everything he'd ever wanted: influence, respect, freedom. Yet on nights like this, when silence pressed against the glass walls of his office, he sometimes wondered what he'd sacrificed to get here. 10 years earlier, he'd made a choice that secured his path. A choice that still visited him in dreams he refused to acknowledge upon waking. His phone vibrated with a text from the board chair. "Congratulations on the Singapore deal. You've outdone yourself again." Julian slipped the phone into his pocket without responding. Praise had become background noise, expected rather than celebrated. He gathered his coat and headed toward the elevator, nodding to the cleaning staff as he passed. The restaurant was exactly what he needed tonight: quiet, discreet, with a wine list that justified the astronomical prices. Julian settled at his usual corner table, ordering without looking at the menu. The sommelier approached with practiced deference, presenting a bottle Julian had reserved earlier. "An excellent choice, Mr. Hayes." Julian nodded, watching as ruby liquid spiraled into the glass. He took a measured sip, letting the complexity wash over his palate. This was his ritual after closing major deals. A moment of solitude before the next mountain appeared on the horizon. A burst of laughter drew his attention to the entrance. A woman guided 2 children through the door, shaking raindrops from an umbrella. Something about her silhouette caught in Julian's chest, a familiarity he couldn't immediately place. When she turned, time collapsed. Isabelle Winters, 10 years older but unmistakable. Her dark hair was shorter now, framing a face that had matured, from pretty to striking. She hadn't seen him yet, focused on helping the children remove their coats. Julian's hand tightened around the stem of his glass. Their last conversation played in his mind with perfect clarity, her voice breaking as she told him she was pregnant, his cold dismissal, the accusation that she was trying to trap him just as his company was taking off. "It's not possible," he'd said, "and even if it were, I'm not interested in being manipulated." He'd walked away without a backward glance, convinced he'd made the only rational choice. Within weeks, she'd disappeared from the city, and he'd buried the memory beneath quarterly reports and expansion plans. Now she stood 20 feet away, helping a young boy into his chair while a girl with identical features settled across from him. Twins, around 9 years old. Julian's breath caught as the boy turned, laughing at something his sister said. The profile was like looking into a mirror from the past. The same straight nose, the same angle of jaw that Julian saw in old photographs of himself. His heart hammered against his ribs. The girl pushed her hair back with a gesture so familiar it made his throat tighten. She had his eyes. Not just the color, but the shape, the way they narrowed slightly when she smiled. The waiter approached Isabelle's table and Julian heard her voice for the first time in a decade. Still soft, still carrying that slight lilt when she asked questions. "Ethan, what would you like?" she asked the boy. Ethan. His son's name was Ethan. The girl was studying the menu with intense concentration, her brow furrowed exactly the way Julian's did when analyzing complex data. "Madeline, remember you don't like mushrooms," Isabelle reminded gently. "Madeline, his daughter." Julian sat frozen, wine forgotten, as the reality he'd denied a decade ago stared back at him with his own eyes. Children he'd rejected, a family he'd walked away from with cold certainty. Isabelle must have felt his gaze. She looked up, scanning the restaurant until her eyes locked with his. Recognition flashed, followed by something harder, a protective wariness that made her straighten in her chair. For a long moment they simply looked at each other across the crowded room, a decade of unspoken words suspended between them. Then Isabelle leaned toward the twins, saying something Julian couldn't hear. Both children glanced in his direction with innocent curiosity. They had no idea who he was. Julian stood, legs unsteady beneath him. He needed to speak to her, to them. But what could he possibly say after 10 years of absence? What right did he have to disrupt the life she'd built without him? Before he could decide, Isabelle rose and approached his table, her expression carefully composed. "Julian," she said, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. "I didn't expect to see you here. Isabelle." Her name felt strange on his tongue after so long. Words failed him, a rare occurrence for a man who commanded boardrooms with ease. "We're celebrating the twins' birthday," she said, filling the silence. "They wanted to try somewhere fancy." "They're beautiful," he managed, the inadequacy of the words burning in his throat. Something flickered across her face, pain, perhaps, or anger carefully controlled. "Yes, they are." "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question. "Yes." No hesitation, no room for doubt. "They're yours, Julian, not that you wanted to know." The confirmation hit him with physical force. He'd spent years convincing himself she'd been lying, that the timing had been a convenient coincidence. The truth stood in stark relief now, undeniable in the faces of the children watching them curiously from across the room. "I should have," he began. "You made your choice," Isabelle interrupted, her voice low but firm. "We've made our lives accordingly." Julian looked past her to the twins, Ethan and Madeline, who were now whispering to each other occasionally, glancing toward their mother and the stranger she was speaking with. "Do they know about me?" he asked. "They know their father wasn't ready to be a parent." Her words were measured, careful. "I've never spoken badly of you. They're too important to burden with adult resentments." The grace in her approach shamed him more than any accusation could have. While he'd been building an empire, she'd been building human beings, and doing it with more integrity than he'd shown in walking away. "I was wrong," he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. Julian Hayes didn't admit mistakes. He calculated risks and accepted consequences. But this wasn't a business decision gone sideways. This was flesh and blood, his flesh and blood. Isabelle's expression softened slightly. "Yes, you were, but that was a long time ago." "Would you," he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you allow me to meet them? Properly, I mean." She studied him, weighing something he couldn't read. "That's not a simple request, Julian. They're not a business opportunity you can suddenly take interest in." "I know." And he did know, with a clarity that made his chest ache. "But I'd like the chance to try, if you'll let me." Isabelle glanced back at the twins, who were now attempting to fold their napkins into complicated shapes. When she turned back to Julian, her expression was resolute. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "They deserve to know where they come from. But this happens on their timeline, not yours. I won't let them be hurt." Julian nodded, understanding the warning beneath her words. "Thank you." She returned to her table without another word. Julian watched as she smiled at the twins, her entire demeanor transforming from guarded to warm. She was a good mother. That much was obvious in every interaction, every gentle correction, every shared laugh. He'd missed everything. First words, first steps, first days of school, birthdays and Christmas mornings. Skinned knees and bedtime stories. The thought hollowed him out, leaving a void where certainty had once resided. Julian paid his bill and left without finishing his meal, unable to sit across the room from the family he hadn't known he wanted until this moment. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. He walked without direction, his mind replaying the last decade through a new lens. Every achievement felt suddenly hollow. What good was an empire with no one to share it with? What meaning did success have when measured against the lives he'd missed shaping? Back in his penthouse, Julian moved through silent rooms that had always seemed appropriately minimal but now felt simply empty. He found himself in his home office, opening his laptop to do what he always did when confronted with an unknown: research. He typed Isabelle's name into the search bar. Results populated the screen. Professional accomplishments, community involvement, a small design firm she'd founded 6 years earlier. She'd built a life of substance and meaning, raising their children while establishing herself in a competitive field. There were no photographs of the twins online. She'd protected their privacy carefully. But Julian could picture them clearly, Ethan's serious expression as he studied the menu, Madeline's concentrated frown as she folded her napkin. His children. The word felt foreign and essential all at once. Sleep eluded him that night. Julian stood at his window as dawn broke over the city, watching light transform glass and steel from shadow to substance. For the first time in years, the empire he'd built seemed less important than what he'd carelessly discarded. His phone rang at precisely 9 the next morning. Isabelle's name appeared on the screen, sending his heart into an unfamiliar rhythm. "Julian Hayes," he answered, falling back on formality to steady himself. "It's Isabelle." Her voice was clear, decisive. "I've thought about your request. The twins have questions I can't answer for them. If you're serious about meeting them, really meeting them, I won't stand in the way." Relief washed through him. "Thank you, I am serious." "Sunday afternoon," she said. "There's a park near our home. Neutral ground, 2 o'clock. I'll be there." "Julian." Her tone shifted, carrying a warning. "If you disappoint them, if this is some passing curiosity or guilt that fades when it becomes inconvenient, don't come at all. They deserve better than that." The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. "I understand." After she hung up, Julian did something unprecedented. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the next week. Board meetings, investor calls, site visits, all of it could wait. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Hayes was prioritizing something above Hayes Industries. If you've ever had to face a truth you tried to bury, hit like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most important decisions we make aren't the ones that build our careers, but the ones that rebuild our humanity. Sunday arrived with painful slowness. Julian dressed with uncharacteristic indecision, changing his tie 3 times before abandoning it altogether for an open collar. Too formal, and he'd seem unapproachable. Too casual, and it might appear he wasn't taking this seriously. The park was vibrant with weekend activity when he arrived 15 minutes early. Families picnicked on blankets, children chased each other across open grass, teenagers lounged beneath trees with phones and headphones. Julian spotted them immediately. Isabelle sat on a bench near the playground, watching as Ethan and Madeline took turns on a swing set. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, her hair caught in the breeze. The sight of her, relaxed, present, so different from the corporate partners he typically spent time with, made something shift in his chest. She noticed his approach and said something to the twins. They stopped swinging and followed her gaze to the man walking toward them. Julian felt their scrutiny like a physical touch, curious, unguarded, without the deference or calculation he was accustomed to. "Hello," he said when he reached them, the word inadequate for the moment's wait. Isabelle stood, placing a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Ethan, Madeline, this is Julian Hayes. She paused, meeting Julian's eyes briefly before continuing. He's your father." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, while Madeline tilted her head, studying Julian with an intensity that reminded him of board meetings where he evaluated potential acquisitions. "You look like me," Ethan said finally, his directness startling in its simplicity. "Yes," Julian agreed, throat tight. "I suppose I do." "Mom says you build things," Madeline added, her voice carrying the same slight lilt as Isabelle's. "Buildings and businesses." Julian nodded, surprised that Isabelle had told them anything about him. "That's right. I help create places where people can work and live." "I like building things too," Ethan offered, "but with Legos mostly." A smile tugged at Julian's mouth. "Legos are a good place to start." Isabelle gestured toward a nearby path. "Why don't we walk for a bit? There's an ice cream stand near the pond." The suggestion broke the initial tension, giving them all something to do besides stand awkwardly evaluating each other. As they walked, the twins gradually moved ahead, whispering together in the secret language siblings often develop. "They're remarkable," Julian said quietly to Isabelle. "You've done an amazing job with them." She glanced at him, surprise flickering across her features. "Thank you. It hasn't always been easy, but they're worth every difficult moment." "I should have been there," he said, the words emerging before he could consider them. "I made a terrible mistake." Isabelle was quiet for several steps. "Yes, you did. But regret doesn't change the past, Julian. It only matters if it changes what you do next." Her wisdom struck him with unexpected force. In business, Julian never dwelled on mistakes. He analyzed, adjusted, and moved forward. Yet he'd spent the past week drowning in regret without considering what actions might follow. At the ice cream stand, the twins debated flavors with serious deliberation that made both adults smile. Julian insisted on paying, a small gesture that felt symbolically important. "What's your favorite flavor?" Madeline asked him as they found a bench overlooking the pond. Such a simple question, yet Julian realized he hadn't thought about ice cream preferences in years. "Probably vanilla," he admitted. "I'm rather traditional." "Boring," Ethan declared, licking chocolate fudge from his cone. "Mom likes mint chocolate chip. It's weird, but she says it reminds her of her grandmother." "It does," Isabelle confirmed, smiling at her son. "Memories and tastes are connected." "What memories does vanilla give you?" Madeline asked Julian, her gaze direct and curious. Julian considered the question with more seriousness than he'd given most board proposals that week. "When I was about your age, my father would sometimes take me for ice cream after school. Plain vanilla in a sugar cone. It was the only time he wasn't working or checking his watch." The memory surprised him. He rarely thought about his father, who had died when Julian was in college. The parallels weren't lost on him, another businessman who had prioritized work over family, whose legacy Julian had unconsciously replicated. The afternoon unfolded with cautious conversation. Julian learned that Ethan excelled at math and science but struggled with spelling. Madeline was a voracious reader who could lose herself in books for hours. Both played soccer, though Madeline admitted she mostly liked the running part while Ethan enjoyed the strategy. Small details that painted a picture of the people they were becoming. People Julian had helped create but hadn't helped shape. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the grass, Isabelle checked her watch. "We should head back. You both have homework to finish before tomorrow." The twins groaned in unison, a sound so normal, and yet so foreign to Julian's experience that it made his chest tighten. "Will we see you again?" Ethan asked Julian directly, his expression serious. Julian looked to Isabelle, unwilling to make promises without her approval. She gave a slight nod. "I'd like that very much," Julian said. "If it's all right with your mother, perhaps next weekend." "We have soccer on Saturday morning," Madeline informed him. "You could come watch if you want." The casual invitation, so easily extended, so monumental in meaning, left Julian momentarily speechless. "I'd be honored," he managed finally. Goodbyes were awkward but not uncomfortable. The twins waved as they walked away with Isabelle, occasionally looking back at the man who remained standing by the pond, watching until they disappeared from view. That night, Julian sat in his silent penthouse, the day's conversations replaying in his mind. He'd built his life around acquisition and growth, measuring success in market share and profit margins. Now he found himself evaluating a different kind of wealth. The kind found in a child's direct gaze, in shared ice cream on a park bench, in the simple invitation to witness a Saturday morning soccer game. His phone chimed with a text from Isabelle. "They'd like you to come to dinner after soccer next week, if you're available." "Nothing fancy, just spaghetti at our place." Julian stared at the message, understanding the significance of being invited into their home. He typed back immediately, "I'll be there. Thank you." Monday morning brought Julian back to Westbrook Tower, but something had shifted. The gleaming glass and steel that had always represented achievement now felt like a fortress, separating him from what mattered. "You have the board meeting at 10, his assistant reminded him as he walked through the door. "And Victor Blackwell wants to discuss the Hayes Foundation scholarship event. He says it's urgent." Julian nodded, only half listening. "Push the board meeting to tomorrow. And tell Victor I'll see him at 11. His assistant blinked in surprise. Julian Hayes never rescheduled board meetings. "Is everything all right, sir?" "Yes, Diane. Better than all right." He smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to startle her. "I just need to make some adjustments to my priorities." At 11, Victor Blackwell strode into Julian's office without knocking, a privilege earned through years as Julian's mentor and the company's board chairman. At 65, Victor carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms and never lost an important vote. "Julian," he said, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation. "The scholarship event is in 3 weeks. We need to finalize the recipients." The Hayes Foundation Scholarship was the company's flagship philanthropic initiative, providing full college funding to promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. It was good PR, good tax strategy, and occasionally even produced future Hayes Industries employees. "I've been reviewing the applications," Julian said, pulling up files on his computer. "There's a school in the East District that has several exceptional candidates." Victor leaned forward. "Eastridge Academy? I thought we were focusing on the South Side schools this year." "Plans change," Julian replied. "Eastridge has been overlooked in previous cycles, and their science program is producing remarkable results despite limited resources." What Julian didn't mention was that he'd spent the previous night researching the twins' school and discovering it was Eastridge Academy. The coincidence felt like an opportunity, a chance to see another aspect of their lives while doing something genuinely beneficial. Victor studied him with narrowed eyes. "You seem different today, distracted." "Not distracted, focused on what matters." "And what matters suddenly changed over the weekend." Victor's tone was light, but his gaze was shrewd. "You've never shown particular interest in the scholarship selections before." Julian met his mentor's eyes. "Perhaps I should have." Victor leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "I heard you rescheduled the board meeting. That's a first." "It was necessary." "For what exactly?" Julian considered how much to share. Victor had been his father's closest friend and had guided Julian's career since he took over the company. But some truths weren't corporate matters. "Personal business," Julian said finally. Victor's eyebrows rose. "You don't have personal business. That's why you're so damn good at what you do." The comment, meant as a compliment, struck Julian differently now. Was that really what people thought of him? A man so consumed by work that he had no life outside it? "Things change, Victor." "Things like what?" Victor pressed, his business instincts sensing a shift that could affect the company. Julian was saved from answering by his phone. Isabelle's name flashed on the screen. "I need to take this," he said, reaching for the phone. Victor stood, clearly displeased by the dismissal. "We're not finished discussing the scholarship event." "We'll continue tomorrow," Julian said, already answering the call. "Isabelle?" Victor paused at the door, his expression sharpening at the unfamiliar name, but Julian was no longer paying attention to him. "Julian, I'm sorry to call during work hours," Isabelle said, her voice tight with stress. "There's a situation at Ethan's school. He's been accused of cheating on a math test, but he swears he didn't. The principal wants to meet with his parents, and I—" She hesitated. "I thought you might want to be involved." Julian didn't hesitate. "Text me the address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and looked up to find Victor still standing in the doorway, watching him with undisguised curiosity. "Cancel my afternoon," Julian told his assistant through the intercom. "Something important has come up." "More important than the Singapore investors' call?" Victor asked, his tone making clear how unprecedented this was. Julian grabbed his jacket. "Yes, Julian." Victor's voice hardened. "What's going on?" "I'll explain later," Julian said, already moving toward the door. "Some things can't wait." As he brushed past his mentor, Victor caught his arm. "Whatever this is, remember you have responsibilities to this company. To your father's legacy?" Julian met the older man's gaze. "I'm beginning to understand I have other responsibilities too." He left Victor standing in the doorway. Confusion and concern etched across his face. For the first time in his career, Julian Hayes was walking out of Westbrook Tower in the middle of a workday for something that had nothing to do with business. Have you ever rediscovered what truly matters in life? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more consequential stories. The school was a modest brick building with a well-maintained playground. Julian parked his sleek black car among minivans and sedans, feeling conspicuously out of place. He found Isabelle waiting in the main hallway, pacing with nervous energy. "Thank you for coming," she said, genuine relief in her voice. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." The certainty in his voice surprised them both. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "The principal's waiting. Ethan's inside already." The principal's office was small but tidy, with framed diplomas and children's artwork competing for wall space. Ethan sat in an oversized chair, his feet barely touching the ground. When he saw Julian enter behind his mother, his eyes widened with surprise, then relief. "Mr. and Ms. Winters, thank you for coming," the principal began, then paused, noticing Julian. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met." "Julian Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Ethan's father." The principal's eyebrows rose slightly as she shook his hand. "Miss Peterson, I wasn't aware Mr. Hayes would be joining us. I only recently re-entered Ethan's life," Julian said smoothly, not missing the flash of surprise on Isabelle's face at his directness. "But I'm fully committed to supporting him now." Ms. Peterson nodded, gesturing for them to sit. "Well, I'm afraid we have a serious situation. Ethan's math test shows answers identical to another student's, including the same unusual approach to solving the problems." "I didn't cheat," Ethan said immediately, his voice small but firm. "I just solved it the way that made sense to me." Julian studied his son's face, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw, the same expression Julian saw in the mirror when facing down corporate challengers. "May I see the test?" Julian asked. The principal hesitated, then slid a paper across her desk. Julian examined it carefully, noting the complex equations and Ethan's methodical solutions. "This approach," Julian said, pointing to a particular problem. "It's unconventional but elegant. It's actually how I would solve it." "That's what I tried to tell Mrs. Benson," Ethan said, leaning forward. "I didn't copy anyone, I just figured out a shortcut." Julian looked at his son with newfound appreciation. "You have a gift for seeing patterns, don't you?" Ethan nodded eagerly. "Numbers just make sense to me." Julian turned to the principal. "When I was Ethan's age, I was often accused of the same thing. My teacher couldn't believe I'd found alternative solutions without help." He smiled slightly. "It seems mathematical intuition runs in the family." Miss Peterson looked between father and son, noting the identical expressions of quiet determination. "The similarity is remarkable," she admitted. "But we still have the issue of identical answers with another student." "Perhaps the other student copied from Ethan," Isabelle suggested, her protective instinct evident. "Or perhaps," Julian added, "two bright students independently discovered the same approach. It happens in mathematics, more often than you might think." The principal considered this. "I'll speak with Mrs. Benson about administering a similar problem under supervised conditions, if Ethan can reproduce his work independently." "He can," Julian said with absolute confidence, earning a grateful look from his son. As they left the office, Ethan walked between them, visibly relieved. "Thanks for coming," he said, looking up at Julian. Nobody ever believes me when I say I can just see the answers. I believe you, Julian replied. Some minds work differently. It's not cheating, it's seeing what others miss. Isabelle watched this exchange with a complex expression. Ethan, wait for us by the front desk. I need a moment with your father. When Ethan was out of earshot, she turned to Julian. You didn't have to leave work for this. Yes, I did, he repeated his earlier words. This matters more. You introduced yourself as his father, she said quietly. Not just to the principal, but to him. That means something, Julian. I know. He met her gaze steadily. I meant it. This isn't a business transaction. You can't just decide to be a father when it's convenient and disappear when it's not. I understand that now. Julian's voice softened. I walked away once because I was afraid. Not of responsibility, but of failing at something I couldn't control with spreadsheets and projections. I won't make that mistake again. Isabelle studied him, searching for insincerity and finding none. We'll see, she said finally, but her tone had lost its edge. As they walked Ethan back to his classroom, Julian felt his phone vibrate repeatedly in his pocket. Victor, no doubt, demanding explanations. For the first time in his career, Julian let the calls go to voicemail. The following Saturday found Julian on the sidelines of a soccer field, watching as Ethan and Madeline raced across the grass with their teammates. He stood slightly apart from the other parents, unsure of his place in this community of people who had been cheering for his children while he'd been oblivious to their existence. First game? A woman approached, offering a paper cup of coffee from a thermos. Yes, Julian admitted, accepting the coffee. Thank you. I'm Karen, Zoe's mom. She nodded toward a girl passing the ball to Madeline. You must be the twins' dad. They mentioned you'd be coming. The casual acknowledgement, the twins' dad, hit Julian with unexpected force. Yes, Julian Hayes. Recognition flickered in Karen's eyes. The Julian Hayes of Hayes Industries? He nodded, bracing for the usual response. The subtle shift to networking mode that followed when people realized who he was. Instead, Karen laughed. Well, that explains a lot about Madeline. That girl negotiates snack trades at lunch like she's brokering international deals. Julian found himself smiling. Does she? Oh, yes. Last week she somehow traded a plain yogurt for 3 chocolate chip cookies and convinced the other kid it was a fair deal because the yogurt was premium protein. Pride bloomed unexpectedly in Julian's chest. And Ethan? Quiet but scary smart. He helped my Zoe with her science project, explained density in a way that finally made sense to her. Karen sipped her coffee. You've got great kids. Their mother deserves the credit, Julian said honestly. Karen studied him over the rim of her cup. Isabelle is amazing. No question. Single parenting twins while building her business from scratch. Superwoman stuff. Julian's curiosity piqued. Her business? Winter Designs. She's transformed half the commercial spaces downtown. The woman has an eye for turning dated buildings into something special while keeping their character. Julian made a mental note to look into Isabelle's professional work more thoroughly. He'd been so focused on discovering who his children were that he'd neglected to learn who she had become. A cheer erupted from the field as Ethan made a perfect pass to a teammate who scored. Julian found himself clapping and shouting encouragement, the unfamiliar role of soccer dad fitting more comfortably than he would have expected. After the game, a narrow victory, the twins ran to where Julian and Isabelle stood, faces flushed with exertion and excitement. Did you see that pass? Ethan asked Julian, eyes bright. Perfect timing, Julian confirmed. You saw the opening before anyone else did. And I stole the ball twice, Madeline added, not to be outdone. You were both incredible, Julian said, meaning it. Can we still have spaghetti at our house? Madeline asked, looking between her parents. Of course, Isabelle assured her. That was the plan. Julian followed them to a modest townhouse in a pleasant neighborhood. The home Isabelle had created was warm and lived in. Colorful artwork, clearly the twins' creations, adorned the walls. Bookshelves overflowed with well-read volumes, and comfortable furniture invited relaxation rather than formality. It was everything his sterile penthouse was not. Make yourself at home, Isabelle said, heading toward the kitchen. Kids, shower and change before dinner. Julian wandered into the living room, drawn to framed photographs on a side table. The twins as infants, tiny and perfect. Their first birthday, faces smeared with cake. First day of school, backpacks almost bigger than they were. A timeline of moments he'd missed, preserved in glass and wood. "That's us when we were babies," Madeline said, appearing at his elbow. "Mom says we were really small when we were born." Julian picked up a frame showing the twins at perhaps 6 months, lying on a blanket, their tiny hands reaching toward the camera. "You were perfect," he said softly. "Why didn't you live with us when we were little?" The directness of her question, delivered without accusation, caught Julian off guard. He set the photo down carefully, turning to face his daughter. How did one explain a decade of absence to a 9-year-old? "I made a mistake," he said finally, opting for simple truth. "A big one. I was afraid of being a father, so I convinced myself I couldn't be one." Madeline considered this with the same serious expression she'd worn studying the restaurant menu. "Were you scared we wouldn't like you?" The question pierced him with its innocent insight. "Maybe I was, but mostly I was scared I wouldn't be good at it. Being a father isn't like running a company. There's no manual, no quarterly reports to measure success. Mom says nobody knows what they're doing as parents. They just try their best and hope it works out." Julian smiled despite the ache in his chest. "Your mom is very wise." "Are you still scared?" Madeline asked. "Yes," he admitted. "But I'm here anyway." She nodded, apparently satisfied with his honesty. "Good. Ethan needs help with his science project. It's about bridges, and Mom doesn't know much about engineering." Just like that, he was assigned a role. Not forgiven, exactly, but needed. It was more than he deserved, and exactly what he wanted. Dinner was a revelation. Julian, accustomed to business meals where conversation served strategic purposes, found himself immersed in the chaotic symphony of family dinner. The twins talked over each other, sharing school stories and soccer highlights. Isabelle gently moderated, ensuring both had their moment to speak. Julian mostly listened, absorbing this glimpse into the life that had continued without him. "Mr. Hayes, Julian, can you help me with my bridge tomorrow?" Ethan asked, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "It keeps falling down in the middle." "I'd be happy to," Julian replied, warmed by the request. "And you can call me whatever makes you comfortable, Ethan." The boy considered this seriously. "What about Dad? Is that okay?" Julian's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his throat suddenly tight. "That would be more than okay," he managed. Isabelle watched this exchange with guarded eyes, protective but not interfering. "If he gets to call you Dad, then I do too," Madeline declared, competitive as always. "I'd like that very much." Julian said, his voice steadier now. After dinner, Julian insisted on helping with dishes despite Isabelle's protests. The twins disappeared to finish homework, leaving the adults alone in the kitchen. "They're adjusting quickly," Isabelle observed, handing him a plate to dry. "They're remarkable children, resilient." Julian carefully placed the dish in the cabinet where he'd seen her take others from. "You've done an extraordinary job with them, Isabelle." She paused, soapy hands stilling in the water. "It wasn't always easy." "I can't imagine it was." He hesitated. "I should have been there." "Yes, you should have." Her directness was refreshing after years of corporate diplomacy. "But you're here now, and they seem to want you in their lives. That's what matters to me." "And you? What do you want?" Isabelle looked at him, then really looked at him. "I want my children to be happy and secure. I want them to know they're loved unconditionally. And I want to be sure you understand what you're committing to." "I do." She shook her head. "No, Julian, I don't think you do. This isn't about showing up for soccer games and helping with science projects. It's about being there when they're sick at 3 a.m., when they fail a test despite studying hard, when they fight with friends and their hearts are broken. It's messy and unpredictable and completely resistant to your corporate scheduling." Julian set down the towel and turned to face her fully. 10 years ago, I walked away because I was terrified of exactly that messiness. I'd spent my entire life in my father's shadow, learning that success meant control, precision, and emotional distance. I didn't know how to be the father they deserved. And now? Now I understand what I lost, what I threw away. He gestured toward the living room where children's laughter drifted from upstairs. This, a home that's actually lived in, people who care about more than quarterly projections. I built an empire that feels empty compared to one evening in your kitchen. Isabelle's expression softened slightly. That's a good answer, but it's still just words, Julian. Time will tell if you mean them. I know I have to earn your trust. I'm prepared to do that however long it takes. Before she could respond, Julian's phone rang. Victor Blackwell's name flashed on the screen, the 5th call that day. You should get that, Isabelle said. Sounds important. Julian silenced the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. It can wait. Her eyebrows rose. The Julian Hayes I knew would never say that about work. I'm not the same man you knew. The week that followed established a new pattern in Julian's life. Mornings at Hayes Industries, afternoons increasingly spent with the twins. He helped Ethan build a suspension bridge that won first prize in the science fair. He attended Madeline's debate club competition, swelling with pride as she systematically dismantled her opponent's argument with logic that would have impressed his board members. At work, the changes didn't go unnoticed. His assistant adapted to his new schedule with professional efficiency, but others were less accommodating. You've missed 2 investor calls this week, Victor said, striding into Julian's office Friday afternoon. The Singapore team is getting nervous. Julian looked up from his computer. I spoke with them this morning. They're satisfied with the revised timeline. That's not the point. Victor closed the door behind him. You're distracted. The board is noticing. The company is performing better than ever. For now. Victor took a seat across from Julian. What's going on with you? Who is this woman you keep rushing off to see? If it's just an affair, it's not an affair, Julian interrupted sharply. And it's personal. Victor leaned forward. Nothing is personal when you run a company this size. Your father understood that. My father died alone with regrets he never had the chance to address, Julian replied evenly. I'm trying to avoid that particular legacy. Victor's eyes narrowed. This is about the Hayes Foundation event next week, isn't it? You've been obsessed with those Eastridge Academy scholarships. Julian considered his options. The event was approaching, and Victor would discover the truth soon enough. Perhaps it was time for transparency. I have children, Victor. The older man blinked, clearly not expecting this revelation. What? Twins, a boy and a girl. They're 9 years old and they attend Eastridge Academy. Victor stared at him. 9 years? You never mentioned. I didn't know about them until recently, Julian said, not entirely truthfully. Their mother and I. It's complicated, but they're my children, and I intend to be part of their lives. Understanding dawned on Victor's face, followed quickly by calculation. This could be problematic from a PR perspective. An heir appearing out of nowhere. They're not a PR problem, Julian cut him off coldly. They're my family. Of course, Victor backtracked smoothly. I simply meant we should control the narrative, perhaps a carefully worded press release. No. Julian's tone left no room for discussion. My children aren't a corporate announcement. When and how they're introduced to the public is their mother's decision and mine. Victor studied him with new eyes. You're serious about this? Completely. The board won't like surprises, Julian, especially ones that affect succession planning. The board works for the shareholders, and I remain the majority shareholder, Julian reminded him. My personal life is my own. Victor stood, straightening his jacket. Your father built this company with single-minded focus. He understood the sacrifices leadership requires. And I'm grateful for the company he built, Julian replied. But I'm not my father, and I won't make his mistakes. After Victor left, Julian sat back in his chair, considering the confrontation. For the first time, he was seeing Hayes Industries not just as his legacy, but as something that might one day belong to Ethan and Madeline, if they wanted it. The thought shifted his perspective on everything from corporate strategy to sustainability initiatives. His phone chimed with a text from Isabelle. Kid's asking if you're still coming to dinner. Madeline wants to show you her debate trophy. Julian smiled, typing back, Wouldn't miss it, and I have news about the Hayes Foundation event I'd like to discuss with you. The Hayes Foundation scholarship event was traditionally held at corporate headquarters, a sterile affair of polite applause and oversized checks presented in the main lobby. This year, Julian had other ideas. "You want to host it at Eastridge Academy?" Isabelle asked that evening, after the twins had gone to bed. They sat in her small backyard, the spring air cool but pleasant. "It makes sense," Julian explained. "The school has several scholarship recipients this year, and it would mean more to the students to be recognized in their own environment." Isabelle studied him over her wine glass. "And it has nothing to do with wanting to publicly acknowledge the twins." Julian met her gaze. "I won't lie, the thought crossed my mind, but only if you're comfortable with it, and only if they are." "Julian," she set her glass down carefully, "have you thought about what this means? Once it's public knowledge that Julian Hayes has children, everything changes for them. Privacy, security, social dynamics at school, none of it will be the same." "I've thought about it constantly," he admitted. "I've already spoken with security consultants about discrete measures we can implement. As for the rest—" He hesitated. "I can't undo who I am, but I can try to minimize the impact on their lives." Isabelle was quiet for a long moment. "They're already attached to you. Ethan talks about your bridge-building techniques constantly. Madeline asked if you could come to Career Day and explain how businesses work." Pride and regret tangled in Julian's chest. "And how do you feel about that?" "Cautiously optimistic," she said with a small smile, "but still cautious." "That's fair," he leaned forward. "About the event, if you'd rather keep them separate from it, I understand completely." Isabelle considered this. "Let me think about it, and I'll need to talk to them. They're old enough to have some say in decisions that affect their lives." Julian nodded, respecting her approach. "Of course." As he prepared to leave, Isabelle walked him to the door. "You surprised me today," she said quietly. "How so?" "You're here on a Friday night discussing children and school events instead of working late or attending some corporate function. The Julian I knew would never have made that choice." "The Julian you knew was missing what mattered most," he replied simply. "I'm trying not to make that mistake again." The Hayes Foundation scholarship event was scheduled for the following Wednesday. By Monday morning, Julian had finalized arrangements to move it from corporate headquarters to Eastridge Academy's auditorium, a decision that baffled his executive team but which he defended with unwavering certainty. "The recipients deserve to be celebrated in their own community," he explained during the final planning meeting. "It's about them, not about Hayes Industries' image." Victor Blackwell remained skeptical. "This is unprecedented, Julian. The press expects the usual format at headquarters." "The press will adapt," Julian replied, "and so will we." After the meeting, Victor lingered behind, closing the conference room door. "I've been looking into this Isabelle Winters," he said without preamble. Julian stiffened. "That wasn't your place." "It's exactly my place when it affects this company." Victor's tone was unapologetic. "She's built a respectable design firm from nothing. Impressive woman. But there's no record of any legal proceedings for child support. No public acknowledgement of paternity." "Because I didn't know," Julian said, the half-truth bitter on his tongue. Victor's expression made clear he didn't entirely believe this. "The timing is convenient. Just as you're being considered for the Industry Leadership Award, just as we're expanding into Asian markets, suddenly you have heirs." Julian stood, anger rising. "My children are not a corporate conspiracy, Victor, and I don't appreciate your insinuation that Isabelle orchestrated this for some financial gain." "I'm looking out for your interests." "No," Julian cut him off. "You're looking out for the company's interests as you perceive them. But you're wrong about what matters here." Victor studied him, something like disappointment crossing his features. "Your father would be concerned about your judgment right now." "My father," Julian said quietly, "would recognize his own mistakes in mine. The difference is I'll have a chance to correct them." The conversation left Julian unsettled. Victor had been his mentor and his father's closest ally. His disapproval stung more than Julian wanted to admit. But as he drove to Eastridge Academy that afternoon to review the event setup, Julian found his resolve strengthening rather than weakening. The school principal, Miss Peterson, greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. Hayes, this is quite an honor for our school." "The honor is mine," Julian replied, following her toward the auditorium. "Eastridge has produced exceptional students despite limited resources. The scholarships are well-deserved." "We're particularly proud of our science program," she said, leading him through hallways lined with student artwork. "Your son Ethan shows remarkable aptitude there." Julian smiled, still adjusting to the casual acknowledgement of his parenthood. "Yes, he does. And Madeline's debate performance last week was outstanding. She has your confidence, if I may say so." "She has her mother's determination and her own natural talent," Julian corrected gently. "I can't take credit for qualities I had no hand in developing." Miss Peterson gave him an appraising look. "That's refreshingly humble for someone in your position, Mr. Hayes." They reached the auditorium, where staff were already arranging chairs and setting up a small stage. Julian discussed technical requirements and timing, ensuring everything would run smoothly. As they finished, the final bell rang and students began flooding the hallways. Julian spotted Ethan and Madeline among the crowd, walking with friends, backpacks slung over their shoulders. They hadn't noticed him yet, and for a moment he simply watched them, Ethan gesturing animatedly about something, Madeline laughing at whatever he'd said. These were his children, moving through the world with confidence and joy despite his absence. The realization both humbled and inspired him. Madeline spotted him first, her face lighting up with surprise. "Dad!" she called, breaking away from her friends and hurrying toward him. Ethan followed quickly behind. The word "Dad" still hit Julian like a physical force each time they used it. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, reaching them slightly breathless. "Checking on arrangements for the scholarship event," Julian explained, "and I thought I might offer a ride home if you'd like." The twins exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations. "Can we stop for ice cream?" Madeline negotiated, already knowing her leverage. Julian laughed. "I think that can be arranged." As they walked toward his car, Julian noticed the curious stares from other parents and students. Word had clearly spread about the twins' connection to him. He wondered how they were handling the attention. "Everyone's being weird," Madeline said, as if reading his thoughts. "Jenny Miller asked if we were rich now." Julian winced. "I'm sorry about that." Ethan shrugged. "I told her we're the same as we always were, just with a dad now." The simple wisdom in that statement caught Julian off guard. "That's exactly right," he said softly. At the ice cream shop, Julian's phone rang again, Victor, undoubtedly with more concerns about the event. He silenced it without looking. "Is that important?" Ethan asked, licking his chocolate cone. "Not as important as this," Julian replied honestly. Madeline studied him with her analytical gaze. "Mom says you run a really big company. Don't they need you all the time?" Julian considered how to explain. "The company has many talented people who can handle things when I'm not there. For a long time, I thought I needed to be involved in every decision. Now I'm learning to prioritize differently." "Because of us?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Julian said simply. "Because of you." When they arrived at Isabelle's townhouse, she was waiting on the porch, a folder of design sketches in her lap. She looked up as they approached, her expression softening at the sight of the twins' ice cream-smeared smiles. "I see someone made a detour," she observed, standing to greet them. "Dad said we could," Madeline explained. The word "Dad" still new enough that Isabelle's eyes flickered to Julian's face when she heard it. "I hope that's okay," Julian said. "Of course." Isabelle gestured to the folder. "I was just reviewing some designs for the community center renovation. The client wants changes that will blow the budget." "Can I see?" Julian asked, genuinely interested. Isabelle hesitated, then nodded. "Kids, homework first, then you can tell me about your day." As the twins disappeared inside, Isabelle spread the sketches across the porch table. Julian studied them with professional appreciation. "These are excellent," he said, noting the elegant solutions she'd found for the aging building's limitations. "The client would be foolish to change anything." "The client has more money than sense," Isabelle sighed. "He wants marble floors in a community center used primarily by children and seniors." Julian smiled. "Not the most practical choice. Exactly what I said." She gathered the sketches, then fixed him with a direct look. I talked to the twins about the scholarship event. Julian tensed slightly. And? They want to attend. They're proud of you, Julian, proud to be connected to you. Her voice softened. But I'm concerned about the publicity. Once this happens, there's no going back to anonymity. I understand, Julian said. I've arranged for minimal press coverage, focused entirely on the scholarship recipients. The twins won't be mentioned or photographed without your explicit approval. Isabelle nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness. There's something else we need to discuss. Victor Blackwell called me today. Julian stiffened. What? Why? He wanted to get to know me better since I'm the mother of your children. Her tone made clear what she thought of this approach. He asked a lot of questions about when I planned to tell you about the twins, why I waited until now. Anger flashed through Julian. He had no right to contact you. No, he didn't, Isabelle agreed. But he's clearly suspicious of my motives. He even hinted at a financial settlement that would make everyone happy. Julian's jaw tightened. I'll deal with Victor. Julian, Isabelle's voice was cautious. How much power does he have at Hayes Industries? He's board chairman, my father's oldest friend, but ultimately, I control the company. Are you sure about that? Her question was pointed. Because he spoke like a man who believes he has significant influence over you and your decisions. The question unsettled Julian more than he wanted to admit. Victor had always been a powerful ally, but their recent disagreements had revealed a controlling streak Julian hadn't fully appreciated before. I'll handle it, he repeated, more firmly this time. Victor won't interfere with our family. Isabelle studied him for a long moment. Just be careful. Men like that don't surrender control easily. The warning stayed with Julian as he drove back to his penthouse that evening. He'd always seen Victor as a mentor, a guide through the complex world of corporate leadership. Now he wondered if that guidance had come with invisible strings he'd never noticed before. His phone rang again as he entered his apartment. Victor for the 6th time that day. Julian answered, his patience wearing thin. You called Isabelle, he said without preamble. Victor didn't deny it. I needed to understand the situation from all angles. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone needs to think clearly here, Julian. This woman appears after a decade with 2 children who look like you, just as the company is reaching unprecedented success. You don't find the timing suspicious? No, Julian said firmly. I don't, because I know what happened 10 years ago. And what was that exactly? Victor pressed. Julian hesitated. The full truth. That he'd known about the pregnancy and denied it. Wasn't something he was proud of. But perhaps transparency was the only way forward. Isabelle told me she was pregnant, he admitted. I didn't believe her. I accused her of trying to trap me for money. I told her I wasn't interested in being manipulated. Silence stretched across the line. I see, Victor finally said, his tone unreadable. And now you've had a change of heart. Now I've seen my children with my own eyes. I've spoken with them, spent time with them. There's no question they're mine, Victor. And there's no question I want to be in their lives, even if it costs you the company. The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Is that a threat? Julian asked quietly. It's a reality check, Victor replied. The board values stability and focus. Your recent behavior raises concerns about both. Julian's grip tightened on the phone. I've built Hayes Industries into what it is today. My recent behavior doesn't change that. Your father entrusted me with protecting his legacy, Victor said. Sometimes that means protecting it from his own son's impulses. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Julian with a growing sense of unease. For the first time, he wondered if his position at Hayes Industries might be more vulnerable than he'd believed. The company had been his life's focus for so long that the thought of losing it would once have been unbearable. Now, strangely, it didn't seem like the worst possible outcome. The morning of the Hayes Foundation scholarship event dawned clear and bright. Julian woke early, reviewing his speech one last time before dressing with particular care. Today would mark a turning point, professionally and personally. His phone chimed with a text from Isabelle. Twins are excited but nervous. See you at the school at 5. Julian smiled, typing back, "Everything will be fine. Looking forward to seeing all of you." At Westbrook Tower, the atmosphere was tense. Julian's executive team had adapted to the venue change with professional efficiency, but whispers circulated about his increasingly frequent absences and Victor's obvious displeasure. "The press has been briefed," his communications director reported during the final meeting. "Focus on the scholarship recipients, minimal corporate messaging as requested." "Thank you," Julian said. "And the security arrangements? In place at Eastridge. Discreet, but thorough, as you specified." Julian nodded, satisfied. He'd taken every precaution to ensure the event would celebrate the students without exposing the twins to unwanted attention. As the meeting concluded, Victor approached, his expression carefully neutral. "A word in private, Julian?" They moved to Julian's office, the glass walls offering the illusion of privacy in the fishbowl of corporate leadership. "The board met this morning," Victor said without preamble. Julian's eyebrows rose. "Without the CEO?" "An informal discussion only." Victor's tone was smooth. "There are concerns about the direction of the company, about your focus." "The quarterly results speak for themselves," Julian countered. "We're outperforming projections across all divisions. Results from initiatives you put in place before your personal situation developed." Victor leaned forward. "The board is considering a restructuring proposal, one that would elevate the role of chairman and create a more balanced leadership approach." The implication was clear. "You're trying to reduce my authority." "I'm trying to ensure stability during what appears to be a transitional period in your life." Victor's expression softened slightly. "Julian, no one questions your contributions, but your father built this company with singular focus. The board simply wants assurance that focus will continue." Julian studied the man who had been his mentor for so long, seeing him with new clarity. "This isn't about the company's stability. It's about control. It's about legacy," Victor corrected. "Your father entrusted me—" "My father is gone," Julian interrupted. "And while I respect what he built, I'm not obligated to replicate his mistakes." Victor's expression hardened. "Careful, Julian. The board votes on the restructuring tomorrow morning. Your position at tonight's event could influence that vote significantly. Are you suggesting I should hide my children to protect my job? I'm suggesting you consider the implications of your choices." Victor stood. "The Hayes name means something in this city. Your father worked his entire life to ensure that. Think carefully about how you represent it tonight." After Victor left, Julian sat motionless, considering the veiled threat. For the first time in his career, Hayes Industries felt like a constraint rather than an achievement. He'd spent years believing the company defined him. Now he wondered if it had actually limited him. His phone rang. Isabelle again. "Julian, there's a problem," she said without greeting. "A reporter from the Business Chronicle called asking for comment on Julian Hayes' newly discovered heirs." "They know about the twins." Julian's stomach tightened. "How?" "I don't know. But they're planning to run the story tomorrow unless we provide an official statement." The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Julian had no doubt Victor was behind the leak. A power play designed to force Julian's hand before the board vote. "I'll handle it," he assured Isabelle, mind already racing through options. "Julian," her voice was tight with concern, "the twins are already dealing with whispers at school. A front-page story would be overwhelming." "I know," he made a decision. "What if we control the narrative? Make the announcement ourselves on our terms, at the event tonight?" Silence stretched across the line. "You want to publicly acknowledge them at the scholarship ceremony?" "Only if you and they are comfortable with it," Julian clarified. "But it might be better than having some sensationalized story break tomorrow." Isabelle was quiet for a long moment. "Let me talk to them. I'll call you back." The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Julian instructed his legal team to prepare injunctions against any unauthorized photos of the twins. His security team enhanced measures at the event. His communications director drafted and redrafted statements, each version reviewed personally by Julian. When Isabelle called back, her voice was resolute. "They want to do it. They're tired of secrets and whispers. Are you sure they understand what this means? Julian asked. As much as any 9-year-olds can, she replied. They know things will change. But Ethan said something that made sense. He said hiding makes it seem like there's something wrong with being your children. Pride and regret tangled in Julian's chest. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the greatest gift I never deserved. Then we'll see you tonight, Isabelle said softly. Whatever happens with your company, Julian, don't regret this choice. By 5 o'clock, Eastridge Academy's auditorium was filled with students, parents, teachers, and press. The scholarship recipient sat in the front row, nervous and excited. Julian stood backstage, reviewing his notes one last time. A text from Victor appeared on his phone. The board is watching. Make the right choice. Julian deleted it without responding. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see Isabelle and the twins seated in the third row. Ethan wore a button-down shirt that matched Julian's own in shade, if not in price. Madeline had insisted on a dress, her hair pulled back with a headband. They looked nervous but determined. The principal introduced Julian with glowing praise, and applause filled the room as he took the stage. Camera flashes popped from the press section. Thank you for that warm welcome, Julian began, setting aside his prepared notes. The Hayes Foundation was established with a simple mission: to create opportunities for exceptional young people to reach their full potential. Tonight, we celebrate 10 such individuals whose academic achievements have earned them full college scholarships. He proceeded to introduce each recipient, sharing specific accomplishments that had impressed the selection committee. The students beamed as they accepted their ceremonial certificates, their families cheering from the audience. As the formal presentations concluded, Julian paused, his gaze finding Isabelle in the crowd. She gave a slight nod, permission, and encouragement in one gesture. Before we close this evening, Julian continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart, I'd like to share something personal. Many of you know me only as the CEO of Hayes Industries. For years, that title defined me completely. I measured success in acquisitions and market share, believing that professional achievement was the only legacy that mattered. The room had gone completely quiet, the press leaning forward in anticipation. 10 years ago, I made a decision based on that belief. A decision I've come to recognize as the greatest mistake of my life. Julian's gaze found the twins, who watched him with identical expressions of solemn attention. Recently, I discovered that mistake had consequences I never imagined. It also offered a second chance I never deserved. He took a breath. I'd like to introduce 2 very special people, my children, Ethan and Madeline. A murmur rippled through the audience. Camera flashes intensified as the twins stood, Isabelle's hands on their shoulders. Their mother, Isabelle Winters, has raised them with extraordinary grace and wisdom. She's given me the opportunity to know them, despite having every reason to keep me at a distance. For that gift, I will be forever grateful. Julian stepped away from the podium, moving toward his family. The Hayes Foundation celebrates potential and achievement. No achievement in my life compares to these 2 remarkable children, and no potential is more important to me than the potential to be the father they deserve. He reached them, standing beside Isabelle as cameras captured the moment. Ethan looked up at him with a small, nervous smile. Madeline slipped her hand into his with surprising confidence. Thank you for your attention this evening, Julian concluded, and thank you to Eastridge Academy for hosting us. The real success stories in this room aren't measured in corporate achievements or financial milestones, but in the character and courage of these students and these children. The applause that followed was thunderous. Julian guided his family toward a side exit, away from the pressing journalists. Security cleared a path to a private room where they could gather themselves. You did great, Julian told the twins once the door closed behind them. I'm so proud of you both. Are we famous now? Ethan asked, half joking, half serious. For about 15 minutes, Isabelle answered, smoothing his hair. Then someone else will do something more interesting. Julian's phone vibrated continuously in his pocket. Undoubtedly board members, Victor, the press. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the 3 people in front of him. What happens now? Madeline asked, her analytical mind already moving to the next step. Julian exchanged glances with Isabelle before answering. Now we figure things out together, as a family, It might get a little complicated for a while, but we'll handle it. What about your company? Ethan's question was direct. That man on TV said you're really important there. Julian crouched to his son's eye level. The company is important to me, he acknowledged, but not as important as you and your sister. Whatever happens with Hayes Industries, that won't change. As they prepared to leave through a private exit, Julian's phone rang again. Victor's name flashed on the screen. This time, Julian answered. That was quite a statement, Victor said, his tone icy. The board is meeting tonight instead of tomorrow. I thought you should know. Thank you for the update, Julian replied calmly. This isn't what your father would have wanted, Victor added. He built Hayes Industries to last generations. Julian watched as Isabelle helped the twins with their coats, their faces animated as they discussed the evening's events. You're right about one thing, Victor. My father did build Hayes Industries to last generations. He just didn't live to meet those generations himself. He ended the call, turning his full attention to his family. Whatever tomorrow brought, whether he remained CEO or faced a new chapter entirely, Julian knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. The truth he'd tried to bury in paperwork and denial had finally surfaced, not to destroy him as he'd once feared, but to offer the redemption he hadn't known he needed. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to Consequential Stories with Benjamin for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Julian's position? Would you have chosen family over career, or found another way forward?